Today, we're diving into something that, well, it's a huge contradiction. We're talking about compassion on the battlefield. Think about it. A place literally designed for killing. Yet, it's also where we see some of the most incredible acts of humanity in all of history.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This one question is what we're going to unpack. It just completely messes with our ideas of right and wrong, of duty versus, well, being human. It's a question soldiers have had to answer in a split second, with everything on the line.
And that's the paradox right there. War is organized brutality. Its whole purpose is to break the enemy, period. And yet, inside that very system, we find these stories of soldiers who chose to see a person, not just a uniform. And in doing so, they risked absolutely everything.
All right, so let's jump into some of these stories. And these aren't just little anecdotes, you know? These are moments that show us something really deep about what courage even is.
Okay, so you really have to put yourself here. It's December 1943. Hans Stiegler, he's a German flying ace. Enemy bombers are leveling his country's cities. His own brother was killed earlier in the war. So you can imagine he had every single reason, both personal and professional, to just pull that trigger.
I mean, the stakes could not have been higher. One more kill, and Stiegler gets Germany's highest military honor. But then he gets closer, and he sees what's really going on. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was basically an execution. The American bomber was just shot to pieces, helpless, and somehow, miraculously, still in the air.
And this is the moment. It's a choice. Duty, maybe even revenge and honor on one side, and his own conscience on the other. He didn't see an enemy machine, he saw wounded men inside. To shoot them down now, that wouldn't be combat. It would be murder.
So he did something that was just unthinkable. He flew his fighter right next to that crippled bomber, shielding it so the German anti-aircraft guns on the ground wouldn't finish it off. He guided them all the way to the open sea, gave the American pilot a final salute, and then just peeled away. It's amazing, decades later, those two pilots actually found each other and became the best of friends. Now let's shift gears, because this same kind of courage shows up in a totally different way. This is Richard Stern. It's April 1st, 1933, the day of the big Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses. A lot of people were terrified, frozen, but not Stern. He was a decorated World War I veteran, and he decided he was not going to be silent.
So what did he do? He put on his iron cross, stood right in the doorway of his store, and handed out pamphlets with this message. He wasn't just protesting as a Jew, he was protesting as a loyal German soldier whose honor was being spit on. Get this, he was the only Jew in all of Cologne to publicly protest that day. You know, it's not always about these huge, dramatic gestures. Sometimes the deepest connections happen when all the fighting is finally over. And that brings me to this wonderful story that popped up on Reddit a while back. So, after the war ended, a lieutenant from Newfoundland accepted the surrender of a German naval ship. And for 3 days, while they're all just waiting for a transport, this Canadian soldier and the German captain, who were enemies just days before and couldn't speak a word to each other, they just sat together and played chess. Right there in the middle of all that destruction, they found this common ground, this quiet respect for each other.
Okay, so we've talked about mercy. Now let's talk about an act of courage so insane it sounds like it's straight out of a movie. But I promise you this is 100% real. This is the story of Leo Major.
So, this guy, Leo Major, was a scout with the Canadian Army. During the D-Day landings, a grenade goes off, and he's left partially blind in his left eye. So they try to send him home, right? But he refuses. He actually argued that he only needed his right eye to aim his rifle. He was tough, independent, and absolutely fearless.
And that brings us to April 1945 and the Dutch city of Zwolle. And this number, 50,000. That's how many civilians were trapped inside this city, which was a key German stronghold. Before the Canadians could launch a huge bloody assault, they needed to know what they were up against. So Major and his buddy volunteer for a scouting mission, but his friend is killed almost immediately. And Major, he just snaps. He is enraged. He decides to carry on alone. For hours, this one man ran through the empty streets, firing his machine gun, chucking grenades, capturing small groups of German soldiers. He made so much noise that the entire German garrison thought they were surrounded by a massive Canadian force. So what did they do? They panicked and they ran. One man liberated an entire city.
It was grief for his friend that fueled him. Leo Major took all that rage and channeled it into one of the most unbelievable acts of heroism in the whole war. He wasn't just on a mission, he was totally driven by this incredible purpose. Now, these stories are just wow. But they don't happen in a vacuum, you know? There's a whole legal and ethical framework around this stuff. So what does the law actually say about when the fighting is supposed to stop?
Well, the key idea in international law is this French term, hors de combat. It literally means out of the fight. The second a soldier is wounded or captured or clearly shows they want to surrender, boom, they are legally protected. They are no longer a target.
But what actually counts as surrendering? It's not as simple as you'd think. Legal experts have actually broken it down into a 3-stage test. First, you have to do something. Raise your hands, wave a white flag, a clear signal. Second, the other side has to actually be able to see it. Trying to surrender in the middle of a chaotic firefight might not count. And third, it has to be unconditional. You're completely putting yourself at their mercy.
And this brings us right back around to where we started. We've seen the courage it takes to charge forward. But understanding when to stop, both legally and morally, well, that takes a completely different kind of courage.
So you've really got two sides of the same coin here. On one hand, you have the courage to fight, which Leo Major is the perfect example of, right? It's all about beating your fear to defeat the enemy. But then you have the courage to show mercy, like Hans Stigler did. That's about seeing the human in your enemy, even when it puts you at huge risk. They're both heroism.
And what about Richard Stern, the man who stood up in Cologne? Well, his story doesn't end there. After he escaped to America at age 43, he volunteered for the U.S. Army to go back and fight the very regime that kicked him out. Years later, in Italy, his company was totally surrounded by German machine gunners.
Stern, who spoke perfect German, didn't just fight them. He talked to them. He convinced them to surrender, not by appealing to their fear, but to their hope of one day going home. He saved his men not by killing the enemy, but by seeing their shared desire to just live. He had both kinds of courage.
And so that's the question I want to leave you with. Leo Major helped win the war. Hans Stigler and Richard Stern proved their humanity inside the war. What these stories show us is that true courage isn't just about the power to destroy, but maybe, just maybe, it's more about the strength to choose compassion.